Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Tuesday, might as well be a Monday edition of Cameras and Coffee. And today we're going to talk about how this is going to be part one of 3 videos that I'm going to try to get through all this week. And we're going to talk about how the photography industry is more long-term, more forward-looking than immediate, likely to be affected by the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic. And I heard on the radio today that America is passing 100,000 people who have died of this virus today or in the next couple of days. I didn't catch exactly when that marker will happen. And also had heard a week or so ago that roughly half of those people would not have died if we had had a response which acknowledged the severity of the situation even 2 weeks earlier. Oh, yes, you're a good boy. So there's going to be for a long time a lot of this. Oh, no, Steinbeck, don't spill the hot coffee on your face. Don't do that. There's going to be for a long time a lot of discussion about how this has affected our society and our economy and things like that. The societal question of how do 100,000 people dying is a big one. And then the economic question of how does the economy change by having 100,000 people taken out of it suddenly. That's going to be a big one. But for today, what we're going to do is focus on some of the ramifications for photography. Now, for these videos about this subject that I'm going to make, we're going to divide the photography industry into 3 blanket groups: production, distribution, and use. Okay, so production is going to be the camera companies, the lens companies, companies that make SD cards, whatever, sensors, so forth. That's a whole industry. If you buy a camera of a certain brand, generally speaking, today, and this has been the case for a long time, you're not buying a camera that is 100% produced in a factory owned by that company. They're buying parts from subcontractors, just like the car industry does. Major industries will farm out portions of that work. Sony makes their own sensors, but Nikon and Pentax, for instance, buy Sony sensors to put into their cameras, and I think Canon does too. There are a couple of other sensor makers, but the brand of camera you have, unless you're using a Sony, probably does not have a sensor made by that company, as an example. So production is one, and there's a whole production stream. Second is distribution. For distribution, we're not going to talk about the shipping companies. We're going to talk about retail. Basically, the point of distribution at which the item is distributed to the end user. And then, of course, we have the user. And we're going to talk about these 3 in the reverse order. We're going to go from most personal, which is most relatable to most of you, the user side of this, upstream. So today we're going to talk about how photographers, especially working photographers, are likely to be affected by COVID-19. And of course, feel free to leave your ideas in the comments section. I may not have a chance to write an in-depth response to all of them, but I do read every comment you leave word for word. So let's run through, in a general sense, the process of working with a client as a photographer. You find a client somehow, referral, marketing, whatever. You talk to them, you make an appointment to meet with them or talk to them over the phone or however else you want to communicate about what packages and services they'd like. You do the shoot, you do the editing, you deliver the images. Okay. In a general sense, that is the process. There are two parts of that are really going to be affected by this: meeting with the client and the shoot. Some photographers in some areas, the shoot won't be affected. If you're a product photographer, your work is not going to be affected by COVID-19 because you're not interacting with something that is in all probability likely to give it to you. And if you have it, you're certainly not going to be giving COVID-19 to a watch if you're a watch photographer, let's say. Whole different scenario for portrait photographers, pet photographers, wedding photographers, architectural photographers, people like that. These are people who interact with people. So we'll go chronologically through the general process of this. And the first place where photographers are likely to notice a difference, and this will apply to all of them, is the client interaction. Previously, when I've met with clients, I'll go out to dinner with them, or we'll at least meet in person. We'll visit the venue if the shoot's going to be done at a venue, and it's a very one-on-one sort of client management sales meeting. So, okay, and that was fine when we didn't have a highly virulent disease that is fairly indiscriminate about who it affects going around the planet. So the number one thing that will change is the in-person interaction. Whether this is a short-term or long-term change, I can't predict. But most of your client interactions as a photographer right now and for the foreseeable future will be over something like Zoom or Skype or WhatsApp or some other program you can use where the person can see you and you can see them. So let me set you up for a little bit of success here, because in my previous day job, we were having a lot of video conferences and things like that. And there are some things you can do to set yourself up for success. The first of them is create a space in your working environment that you can have as your interview space or your client meeting space, where the background is professional and clean and tidy and presentable, okay? You don't want to have distractions. You don't want to have a pile of cameras over your shoulder that looks like it's about to tip on you at any point. If you have a vent grate behind you and it's got black lines coming out of it because you haven't changed your air filter in 9 years, that's something you want to deal with, okay? You want to have a clean environment that portrays a sense of, I know what I'm doing and I have my act together. There's a fad right now, I hope it's a fad, of people using fake backgrounds on Zoom calls. That is incredibly unprofessional and disingenuous. It makes it look like you have something to hide. Not only that, if you're moving in and out, the background is morphing around your face. It's distracting and doesn't look natural, but really the biggest issue is that it doesn't look good, and it makes it look like you don't want people to see where you live and work, like you're ashamed of it. So, as a photographer, meeting with clients, it will be important to have a dedicated space that you can easily maintain in a clean and inviting space where you can virtually meet with your clients. So, okay, so you've met with your clients, you've struck a deal with them, and you're going to do a shoot. If you're a photographer who now has to meet people in person, the days of going up to somebody and shaking their hands to start off a photo shoot in the past for the time being. You will definitely, of course, need to wear a face covering of some sort. Even if you don't believe that the face covering helps, it sends a message to your client that you are concerned about their health, because the face covering doesn't keep you from getting a disease. It keeps other people from getting it by trapping the moisture that comes out of your mouth when you talk. And if you are the kind of person who periodically, when you have a hard P or T or S and a little bit of saliva with it, that's when the face mask is ultra, ultra important. So, for instance, when I go out hiking, I have one of these tube things. It looks kind of like a turtleneck, and then when people are coming up the trail, I can just grab the end of it, pull it up over my nose, and when they're 10, 20 feet behind me, I'll drop it down. Because admittedly, these face masks, whatever you get, whether it's just a cloth thing or a tube, you don't need an N95 mask, I promise, for the majority. Unless you're photographing in a medical situation, you don't. They don't make it easier to breathe, and I find that if I wear one for about 20 to 30 minutes, I start breathing enough of my own carbon dioxide that I've got to pull it down. So at any rate, you want to have something where if you are far enough away from the person, you can drop it down below your face, take a few breaths easily and pull it back up, or let them know that if they're more than 20 feet away from you, you're just going to leave the mask down so it's easier to breathe. So at any rate, you definitely want to have a mask to convey the message that you are concerned about your client. If you show up without a mask, what you're telling your client is, if I'm sick, I don't care if you're sick. That's not the kind of message that you want to send to any client in any situation ever, especially right now. Then during the actual photo shoot, if you shoot models or weddings or anything, realistically, if you are photographing people, you probably should not be touching them unless you say, hey, is it okay if I move this flyaway out of your hair really quickly? Or, hey, is it okay if I specifically position your hand so that you know exactly how I want it to look for this shot? It is not a good practice for a photographer just to come up and say, no, put your head like this, right? Without warning. But if you are photographing people, it's now going to be especially more important to maintain that distance so that you're not physically touching them and you're not in their face. And that's going to mean you're going to have to be better about demonstrating what it is that you want them to do, or coming up with new techniques about how to guide people. So if you were the type of photographer who told models how to pose, well, there are better ways to do that anyway. If you, for instance, have models move in and out of positions, you can have them look more natural as they're moving. So instead of being a photographer who says, take this pose and hold it, and put your hand right here, what you can do is you can say, move your hands this way, now move them back, and then repeat that a few times. And then what you'll do is you'll find that you'll have more natural movements from your models anyway. But the point of that is that if you're working with people, you'll need to develop new techniques to get them to get into the poses and stances you need them to that provide that social distance. Okay. For same thing, a very similar thing applies for weddings, of course, because it's basically shooting groups or individual people in a setting where your subjects are not likely to be professional models. So if you're shooting people, you've got either professional or non-professional subjects, right? For modeling, they're professional. For weddings, corporate portraits, family photos, things like that, they're non-professional subjects. And in that case, again, you'll have to maintain that social distance and come up with ways of getting people to move in and out of poses so that it doesn't look like they're on a cruddy Christmas card with a fake smile and a very stilted, tilt your head, smile, look at the camera, that kind of look. You know what I'm talking about. And honestly, one very small positive that can come out of this is anytime we are forced to learn a new technique or forced to learn a new approach, it expands our overall skill set in some way. And so if this situation, if the pandemic forces you to learn some new approaches and techniques, it will in some way, shape, or form make you a better photographer. Okay, what about pet photographers? Because pet photography, people who have pets love getting photos of their pets, right? when you are in the space where you're going to photograph them, if you're outside, all of the same rules apply as to photographing people. Mask on, social distancing, right? If your hands are dirty, you will have the ability to transmit germs to that dog, and then the owner of that dog can get those germs if they pet their dog afterwards. So again, and I should have mentioned it earlier, but throughout all of this, in addition to the mask, you want to keep washing your hands. Wash your hands like you're making 100 sandwiches a day. And having worked in food service for 8 years of my life, the idea of washing my hands is just part of my life. Every time I'm near a sink, it's just second nature. My former job, there was another tenant in the building, and one of their employees never washed his hands leaving the bathroom. Disgusting. Absolutely. Could you imagine, before all of this, shaking that guy's hand and not having any idea that maybe 5 minutes ago he was in the bathroom not washing his hands? Just as a general practice and courtesy and overall disease prevention before all of this happened, washing your hands was an important practice. Would you buy a sandwich from somebody who just put a bunch of dollar bills in the cash register and then immediately went and grabbed a bun and cut it in half and slapped some meat on with their bare hands without washing it? I hope the answer is no. Would you want to have that same person petting your dog or shaking your hand in a photography setting? I again hope that the answer is no. So all of that is just to hammer home a point that's been belabored already in this video. Wash your hands. And also, if you can get your hands on some hand sanitizer, carry some of that so that if the client does reach out and shake your hand out of habit, then you can immediately grab that hand sanitizer and you can both sanitize your hands, okay? And that would just be a nice professional courtesy, and a little bottle of hand sanitizer will go right in your pocket or your camera bag. No big deal. So the majority of the ways in which the industry will change for photographers are not in the practice of the photography, are not in the style or the challenge of getting the materials. It's in client interaction. And as we talked about when we talked about the business of photography a week ago, I think it was a week ago, the majority of the business that a photographer does is client interaction and client service. That's the job. And so this pandemic just changes the way in which you implement that part of the job to demonstrate to your clients that you are very concerned about their safety and very aware that if you are within a 14-day incubation period and have no idea that you have this thing, you are doing everything within your power to make sure that you don't transmit it to anyone else. And there's another side of it. If you are meeting somebody, whether you're photographing them for portraits, wedding, pets, whatever, in an outdoor space, then you also need to be aware of all of the people around you and how far away from them they are. So generally speaking, if you're in an outdoor space and you have a camera and you're photographing people or pets or whatever, people will try to leave you alone. They will try to stay clear of your shoot. Just this past weekend, I was photographing Steinbeck out in Golden, Colorado, and I posted a picture to my community tab where he's up on some rocks, and I was using a 15 millimeter IRIX lens, shooting upward with the sky in the background. And literally 2 seconds before that, a lady and her kid had been walking behind the rocks, and they saw that I was taking a photo, and they hurriedly got to another part of the rocks. And when they got there, I said, "You're fine. You're out of the frame now." They were conscious of the fact that I was photographing Steinbeck and did not want to be in the background of the picture. They didn't want to mess up the photo, which is fine. The sign that I had to, with the park rules, that I had to Photoshop out of that image really would messed up the photo much more. At any rate, so that part of the job will still be pretty easy, but you'll want to make sure you're cognizant that if you are photographing people, that they're not about to go through your shoot. If you're standing 8 feet away from your subject, right, you're safe, you're at a safe distance from them. Especially with the face mask, you're at a safe distance. If somebody, if a group of kids come through without face masks on skateboards right between you, they're within 3 to 4 feet of you, that's no longer a safe distance. So you'll just want to be more cognizant of all the moving parts that are going on around you to make sure that people aren't coming in and out of your shoot. So realistically, how is life going to change for photographers? Client interaction, the tools and the means and the methods in which we interact with our clients, the general social acceptance of how we interact with our clients, especially at the first meeting, the way in which we present ourselves to our clients to show that we are concerned about protecting their health, and the situational awareness that we need to have within our photo shoot area to make sure that everyone is as protected as we can be. And those are it's your shoot. When you're the photographer, it is your shoot. You are in control of it. Okay, and so it is your job, because you are the paid professional in that situation, to be responsible for making sure that all of these things are done properly. That's, frankly, for a lot of photographers, going to be a big change and a bit of a paradigm shift in the way that business is done. So those are some of my thoughts on how photography for photographers will change. In the next part of this series, which will happen tomorrow or the day after, we're going to talk about how the retail sector of this industry will change. And then by the end of the week, we'll have talked about the production sector as well. But next video, we'll talk about retail and how that is likely to be affected by coronavirus in the short and foreseeable future. So, as always, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well, especially working photographers out there, about how you're seeing your practice change during this pandemic and what you think will happen with your practice going forward after the pandemic sort of starts to stabilize, or after there has been enough exposure or a vaccine, hopefully, to create herd immunity, that this is something we don't have to worry about every single day like we do right now. So, as always, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in a couple of days. Steinbeck. I have to get up. I can't turn off the camera, puppy, when you are asleep on my legs. I know you're so tired after yesterday, but that's okay. Oh goodness, what did you do to your nail? I gotta get up now. Yes, I do.